Another beloved franchise might be hitting the market with Sesame Street, and we want to talk about whether or not that needs to be going over to the Walt Disney Company. Yes, Sesame Street with Big Bird, Oscar the Grouch, and the Count are up for sale. Can Bob resist buying it? Let's talk about that on That Park Place. Bob Iger is going to face one of the biggest challenges that he has ever faced here. It is the Bob Iger Try Not to Buy It challenge. Max and HBO wind down deal for Sesame Street original episodes, retaining some library rights. This by Dade Hayes from Deadline. Marvin, I'm especially interested in some of your thoughts on this. I don't know if you know this, but this guy on the left, his name is Big Bird.
Yes, he doesn't sound like Big Bird, but he is Big Bird, yes.
His name is Big Bird. He was a showgirl.
Carol is spinning in his grave. A television staple is looking for a new home. Sesame Street is winding down its nearly decade run on HBO and Max. Warner Brothers Discovery confirmed to Deadline that it has declined to renew the agreement covering original episodes, but will retain select library rights. Sesame Workshop, the nonprofit producer of the show, struck a game-changing deal with HBO in 2015 to have original episodes air first on the premium network before a later broadcast window on PBS. The arrangement was put in place as leading-edge subscription streaming service HBO Now was getting set to launch and lasted through multiple ownership eras. In 2019, a new deal was struck to shift the show's base to HBO Max from linear to HBO. Last month, Sesame Street marked the 55th anniversary of its first broadcast. First aired on PBS it has aired on PBS since 1970. This is a big deal. Sesame Street is one of those brands that's kind of gone by the wayside as the streaming era has come up, and I think the ownership by HBO has really damaged the brand of Sesame Street in a soft but subtle way here, because there are two elements at play when you have a brand like Sesame Street, which is supposed to be the first thing. It used to be one of the first things that children would be allowed to watch on television, but also HBO, especially in the 90s and the early 2000s, was definitely not just associated with scripted programming that went a little hard in the ratings there. I think these are two brands that really could not be any more opposite ends of each other as far as perception goes. So I never understood from a brand standpoint why HBO wanted to have Big Bird on its network. I understand from a business perspective why they wanted to have Sesame Street on their network, but this is one of the worst things that HBO ever did, in my opinion. And I think it kind of killed the Sesame Street brand at the same time. Wounded it, I should say, because obviously we're still talking about it here today. Marvin, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, we've got an article about this on That Park Place, and I make the point in that that Warner Brothers believed that it's moving to a new strategy as far as streaming goes, where it's moving away from kids content and going more toward family and adult oriented content. And yeah, it's a situation where I'm like, okay, you don't think kids watch streaming? Bluey is the biggest thing on all streaming, but at the end of the day, kids don't watch Max. Kids don't watch HBO. And I think that's kind of the point that you so brilliantly made there, Jonas. It was definitely a rough match. But now here's the problem that I foresee in the future with this. Sesame Street is trying to find a new home. Now, I think that's got Netflix written all over it. However, or they could, Iger could finally fulfill Michael Eisner's greatest wish, which was to own Sesame Street, because he tried very hard when they were negotiating with Jim Henson to get Sesame Street characters. But I think what's going to happen is they're going to have issues finding a new home sometime before 2027, because HBO is maintaining the rights to broadcast reruns of Sesame Street, the back seasons through 2027. So I feel like part of the value in Sesame Street going to a new home is being able to say, hey, we've got 55 years worth of children's content here. And they're not going to be able to do that. They're just going to be able to be like, hey, we've got whatever we've got currently.
So, and that's a fascinating thing, because that backlog of Sesame Street was on Max right when they started. You could go back as far back as I want to say
the
there was
first episode of Sesame Street is rough.
It is, and it's black and white, right?
No,
maybe
No, it's in
I'm
color.
thinking of Mr. Rogers. Yeah, I'm thinking of Mr. Rogers here, but it was there, and you could watch years, decades of Sesame Street on Max, and that was pretty cool. It was kind of a nice little time capsule. If they were just teaching about things like ABCs and counting. Here, my favorite joke is somebody says, "Who's your favorite vampire?" And they say, "Oh, the one from Sesame Street." They say, "Well, he doesn't count." Of course, the response to that, exactly, love it. So this is the kind of thing that while Bob Iger is struggling right now to come up with content for the Disney Plus platform, by the way, worth mentioning, of course, the Bluey movie has just been announced here, and that is a production that is being spearheaded. The distributor is Disney, at least in the United States, some association with BBC Studios. It's a good thing from a business standpoint to have this under Disney, but also the cultural issues that would come up with that. It'll remain to be seen whether or not Disney can keep its influence off of what should be a preschool movie, that they don't just put it in theaters and say, you know what, we're going to get rid of our standards here. I think that this is something that Bob Iger is looking at and saying, you know what, I've got a checkbook. We've got lots of money. We have an extra $40 billion in market cap. How much money can we shell out to get the rights to Sesame Street? Because they've shown that they don't actually care about profitability when it comes to Disney Plus. And they can say, oh, we're going to put it on Disney Junior for a little bit here. And we'll also run it on Disney Plus so that they can say that it is a television acquisition. The television division actually makes a little bit of money here, so they don't have to put all of that cost allocation onto Disney Plus. I can see Sesame Street coming to Disney Plus or Hulu within the next few years if Bob Iger isn't able to control himself.
But let me ask both of you a question, because Disney hasn't demonstrated proper use of the Muppets at all. How are you going to convince investors that acquiring Sesame Street's a good move at all?
Because they're going to point to the fact that Sesame Street's past success. That's what they'll end up doing. The Muppets and Sesame Street are very different target audiences, I think. But I'm not saying they're right. I'm saying what I think they'll do. I don't think it'll work. But I think that target audience is the same. For about half the stuff. Otherwise, you wouldn't have Muppet Babies, right? So I'm looking at this and I'm going, how am I going to convince investors, since I don't know how to control Muppets? I don't know how to make them any good or profitable nowadays. So I'm going to go out and acquire Sesame Street, which is directly targeted at kids, which means we can't benefit from it commercially. We can't put commercials on it with Disney Plus or anything else. We don't want to run afoul of COPA or any other issues. So Jonas, do you have any idea?
With something like this, I think that Sesame Street is something, especially if they get part of the merchandising rights, which is at this point, I think that is the only way that Disney is going to try to get something on their platform as high profile as Sesame Street. I don't think this is just talking about the rights to air it on something other than PBS. So I don't think they'll be getting the theme park rights. I don't think they'll be getting the full merchandising rights to Sesame Street.
Theme park rights are already
spoken for. They're tied up with United Theme Parks, or whatever the name of the company that governs SeaWorld and Busch Gardens.
They have a whole Sesame Street land at SeaWorld, and it's actually not bad.
Yeah. And they also have Sesame at some of the Busch Gardens theme parks as well.
Sesame Place, yeah. I have this really strange feeling that there is no way to show an upside for acquiring Sesame Street.
Well, I don't think I don't think there's a literal upside. I don't think there's an actual, but there's the flim flam man over here, the monorail salesman out here. I think that he would be very glad to pat himself on the back and say, investors, you have heard of this. It's ours. So therefore we are great. That is the full logistical flowchart that I think that Bob Iger would put through on something like this.
All right. I don't see it being a benefit And at some point, even if you're Bob Iger, you have to explain a benefit. I just don't see one.
Thanks for watching That Park Plays News. For more information, consider checking out www.thatparkplace.com. And don't forget to subscribe, share, like, and send this out on your favorite social media accounts.